No one paid attention to the poor mechanic when the billionaire's luxury car broke down outside his broken garage, because men like him were meant to stay invisible. His hands were covered in oil, his clothes worn thin by years of struggle, and his life had taught him to keep his head down and stay silent. But the moment the furious billionaire began speaking in Japanese, mocking the place, complaining that no one here could possibly understand him, the mechanic quietly looked up and answered back in flawless Japanese. The air froze. The billionaire turned pale, because the language this poor man spoke wasn't just fluent. It was tied to a buried past, a hidden crime, and a truth powerful enough to destroy an empire. And in that single moment, a forgotten mechanic became the most dangerous man in the room. The moment the poor mechanic opened his mouth, the billionaire's entire world tilted on its axis, because the language that flowed out of him was not supposed to exist there. Not in that broken-down garage with oil-stained floors and flickering lights. Not from a man whose hands were cracked from years of unpaid labor and whose clothes smelled of rust and sweat. Japanese, fluent, precise, beautiful, rose into the air like a forgotten melody, and the silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the past itself had returned to collect a debt long overdue. Before the story goes any further, pause for a moment. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the idea that a single moment can change the course of a life forever, then take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this exist to remind us that humanity still matters. The mechanic's name was Daniel Reyes, though most people in the city never bothered to learn it. To them, he was just another invisible man tucked away in the industrial district, working inside a collapsing garage that looked like it should have been condemned years ago. The roof leaked when it rained, the walls were stained black with decades of exhaust fumes, and the sign outside had lost so many letters that it barely resembled a name. Yet every morning before sunrise, Daniel unlocked the door with the same worn key, flipped on the same buzzing light, and went to work with a quiet dignity no one ever noticed. Life had never been gentle with him. His father had died when he was young, his mother followed soon after, and responsibility fell on his shoulders before he had time to understand what childhood even meant. School became a luxury he couldn't afford. Dreams were packed away like old tools, buried under survival. He learned engines because engines didn't judge. They didn't care how poor you were or where you came from. If you listened carefully enough, they told you what was wrong, and Daniel was always a good listener. Across the city, in a world that could not have been more different, lived Kenji Watanabe, a billionaire whose name carried weight in international business circles. His company spanned continents. His penthouse overlooked the skyline like a throne above the world. Yet behind the polished image and ruthless success lay a man haunted by something money had never been able to fix. Years ago, in Japan, a tragedy had ripped his family apart, leaving behind unanswered questions and a grief he buried beneath work and ambition. On this particular day, fate decided to collide two lives that should never have crossed. Kenji's rare vintage car, a priceless Japanese import with sentimental value tied deeply to his past, broke down in the most humiliating way possible, on the side of a neglected street, far from luxury service centers. Security suggested towing it away immediately, but Kenji, irritated and tired, noticed the nearby garage, barely standing but open. Watched the expensive car roll in like a creature from another universe. He could tell instantly that it was special, not just valuable, but meaningful. Machines like that carried history in their metal. As he inspected the engine, something stirred inside him, memories he had kept sealed for decades. When Kenji grew impatient and spoke sharply in Japanese, assuming no one around could understand him, Daniel responded without thinking. The words came naturally, shaped by years of silence and buried experiences. His accent was authentic, his phrasing respectful, his tone calm. The billionaire froze, his breath catching as he stared at the mechanic like he had just seen a ghost. No one else in the garage understood what had just happened, but they felt it. The air shifted. Something invisible cracked open. Kenji demanded to know how a poor mechanic in a forgotten city could speak his native language so fluently. Daniel hesitated, because some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. His life had been built on forgetting, on surviving without looking back, but fate was no longer asking for permission. Daniel had not always been a mechanic. Decades earlier, he had been a young man with sharp eyes and a curious mind, selected for a special international exchange program sponsored by a Japanese engineering firm. He had lived in Japan, studied language and culture, and worked under mentors who treated him with respect he had never known. For the first time, he had felt seen. He had learned not just the language, but the values behind it: discipline, honor, quiet perseverance. Then disaster struck. An accident at a factory, buried by corporate influence, claimed lives and destroyed reputations. Daniel, a foreign trainee, became an easy scapegoat. Documents vanished, promises were broken. Overnight he lost everything: his position, his future, and the country he had grown to love. He returned home with nothing but knowledge no one cared about, and a language no one around him spoke. Kenji listened as fragments of the story surfaced, his own memories stirring uncomfortably. The accident Daniel described matched one from his past, one his family was indirectly connected to, a chapter Kenji had tried desperately to forget. The billionaire realized, slowly and painfully, that the man standing before him was not just a mechanic. He was a living witness to a truth that had been buried by money and power. And Daniel, wiping grease from his hands, had no idea that speaking a language he loved had just set the stage for a reckoning that would change both their lives forever. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Kenji could not stop thinking about the mechanic's words, the familiarity of his Japanese phrasing echoing in his mind long after he returned to his glass tower in the sky. That language was sacred to him, tied to family dinners, childhood laughter, and the night everything shattered. Hearing it spoken with such respect by a man the world had dismissed stirred something dangerously close to guilt. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to his routine, but nothing felt the same. The garage seemed smaller, the silence louder. Speaking Japanese again had reopened wounds he had stitched closed with years of exhaustion. Memories surfaced uninvited, of cherry blossoms drifting past factory windows, of long evenings studying technical manuals, of believing once that effort would be enough. Kenji began investigating, quietly at first, then obsessively. He pulled old records, spoke to retired executives, followed paper trails that had been deliberately tangled. Each discovery chipped away at the narrative he had been told years ago. The accident had not been unavoidable, the blame had not been shared fairly, and Daniel Reyes had not been guilty of what he was accused of. The truth was ugly. Bribes, cover-ups, lives ruined to protect shareholders and reputations. Kenji's own father's company had benefited from the silence. For the first time in his life, the billionaire felt truly poor, impoverished of integrity. He returned to the garage unannounced, not as a powerful executive, but as a man burdened by responsibility. Daniel sensed the shift immediately. The billionaire's posture was different. The arrogance had been replaced with something fragile. Kenji revealed what he had uncovered, piece by piece. The past was no longer a shadow. It stood between them in full daylight. Daniel listened without interruption, his face unreadable. He had lived with injustice for so long that vindication felt almost foreign. What hurt most was not the lost career or the stolen future, but the years of believing he had been disposable, that his truth didn't matter. Kenji offered money, a lot of it, enough to erase every financial struggle Daniel had ever known. But Daniel shook his head. Money could not give him back the years he spent invisible. What he wanted was acknowledgement, truth, the restoration of a name that had been quietly erased. Moved by a courage he rarely saw, Kenji made a decision that would shock his entire empire. He went public. The announcement sent shockwaves through the business world. A billionaire admitting corporate wrongdoing, exposing his own family's legacy, and naming himself as complicit through silence was unheard of. Stocks trembled, board members panicked, lawyers scrambled. But Kenji did not stop. He ensured that the official records were corrected, that Daniel's name was cleared internationally, that apologies were issued, not buried in legal language, but spoken plainly. The world finally learned what had been stolen from a poor mechanic and how easily power had crushed him. Daniel watched it all unfold with disbelief. People who had never looked twice at him now spoke his name with respect. Engineers reached out from Japan, remembering him. Former mentors apologized through tears. The language he loved no longer felt like a curse. Yet the most powerful change was internal. Daniel stood taller. He breathed easier. For the first time in decades, the weight on his chest lifted. Kenji, stripped of illusions, found something he had been missing all along: purpose beyond profit, responsibility beyond reputation. Two men from opposite ends of society had collided, not by chance, but by necessity. And in doing so, they had proven that truth, once spoken, could not be silenced again. The garage did not close. That surprised everyone. Even after the compensation, after the recognition, after doors opened that Daniel never imagined existed, he chose to keep the place running. He renovated it, strengthened the roof, replaced the sign, but kept the soul intact. The garage became a symbol, not of poverty, but of resilience. Daniel began teaching. Young mechanics, overlooked kids, immigrants with rough hands and sharp minds found a place where knowledge was shared freely. He taught them not just how engines worked, but how dignity survived even in obscurity. Occasionally, he spoke Japanese, not to impress, but to remind them that the world was bigger than the corner they stood in. Kenji visited often, without cameras or press. He listened more than he spoke. He funded scholarships, restructured his companies, and built policies that protected workers instead of sacrificing them. Redemption did not come easily, but he pursued it relentlessly. Years later, when Daniel stood at an international engineering conference in Japan, invited as an honored guest, the applause lasted longer than he expected, not because of wealth or status, but because his story resonated. A man silenced by power, restored by truth. As this story draws to a close, if it touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this survive because people like you choose to engage. And before the final moment fades, leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what part of the story moved you most. Your words matter more than you know. In the end, it wasn't the language that shocked the billionaire. It was the humanity behind it, a reminder that no matter how poor someone looks, their story may carry a truth powerful enough to change the world. And sometimes, all it takes is one voice, long ignored, to finally be heard.